As most of you know, the NATO Defense Ministers meeting ends tomorrow in Brussels, Belgium. We are fortunate today to have with us the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Atlantic, Vice Admiral Ian Garnett of the United Kingdom Navy. He has just returned from Brussels. Admiral Garnett has also been extensively involved in issues relating to Allied Command Atlantic and also the Partnership for Peace initiatives. He is here today to provide you an update on the conference that went on last week and the challenges facing NATO as it approaches its 50th anniversary. And with that, I'll turn over the microphone to Admiral Garnett. Sir.
Thanks, Dwight. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I stand before you as a European working for a US SINC in an international headquarters in Kaunas. There's only one of me. I'm unique. What I want to do this afternoon is to bring you up to date with what happened last week in Brussels, because I attended the NAC and the NAC-C, the North Atlantic Cooperation Council, on behalf of General Sheehan, which is what I normally do. And although I'm sure that some of you may be familiar with the communique that came out, you may not have had time to read it. And so I'd like to run through some of those issues, and then I can answer any questions you might have. Now, the issues I'm going to mention are the ones you see on this board. The whole business of new members, enlargement, expanding the Partnership for Peace program, which has been very successful, the special relationships that NATO is developing with both Russia and Ukraine, the whole business of command and control of NATO operations, and more important, WEU-led operations, reflecting ESDI within NATO, the resources issue, which is beginning to bubble up now, and then finally finish with the summit. Next board, please. Now, enlargement I'm sure you're familiar with. A number of countries aspire to join NATO, and NATO has said that, of course, the alliance is open to new members. It has, of course, welcomed new members twice in the last 50 years. But the points that were made last week at the NAC were that all new members would be new members, full members in all respects. There were no halfway house. That there were no plans to deploy nuclear weapons to the territories of new members, and I think Russia was very pleased to hear that. That sometime next year they would invite one or more countries to start negotiations for accession to the alliance, and that once those negotiations had been completed successfully, then they hoped to welcome one or more new members in 1999, the 50th birthday of NATO. The dialogue that would take place between the summit next year and 1999 would probably be on a 16+1 format. And of course, most importantly, and in accordance with Article 10 of the Washington Treaty, the alliance would remain open for further accession after the first tranche. Next board, please. Moving on to Partnership for Peace, a very successful program, as I mentioned just now. But people recognize that it needs to be built on. It needs to be broadened, it needs to be deepened, it needs to be expanded. We must provide opportunities for partners to join in the process of political consultation, particularly regarding those NATO-led PFP operations in which some partners take part, rather like they're taking part in Bosnia today. We must expand the potential for partner missions. At the moment, it's very much based on search and rescue, disaster relief, and such like. But there's a recognition within NATO, expressed at the NAC last week, that we must expand the Partnership for Peace program to the full range of the new NATO missions, particularly peace support operations. We must involve partners in the operational planning of that involvement, and perhaps we have to expand the PFP process to regional cooperation between partners, and this was a point made very much by Sweden. We need to broaden the exercise program, involve partners in NATO exercises that are based on non-Article 5 missions. Those are missions that don't involve collective defense of NATO territory, which of course is the Article 5 mission. And we involve partners more in the peacetime work of NATO, and there are many strands to that. We're going to offer diplomatic missions in NATO to a number of countries. And for example, in the next year or so, we are likely to see Russian missions at Sakhalin down in Norfolk and at Mons, as well, of course, developing the Russian presence in Brussels. Now, whether those Russian missions are expanded down the command chain remains to be seen. At the moment, I think the mood in NATO is one step at a time. There was universal agreement last week of the need to establish an Atlantic Partnership Council, known for short as APC. This is a new cooperative mechanism to achieve greater coherence between the Partnership for Peace program and the North Atlantic Cooperative Council. Now, just what that will consist of, what the mechanisms will be, remains to be seen, and that's all to be worked out. Next board, please. Moving on now to some very important special relationships. All relationships that NATO has with countries are special, but some are more special than others. Russia, of course, has a very important part to play in European security, and we recognize that in NATO. And there was much debate last week, both in the NAC and the NACC, about how we build a special relationship with Russia. At the moment, and I attended the meeting on Wednesday morning at the 16+1 NATO foreign ministers with the Russian foreign minister. That was a very helpful discussion. Russia, of course, reiterated their opposition to NATO enlargement twice, but without quite the conviction that I had detected at earlier meetings. But Russia welcomed a charter to express a new NATO-Russian relationship, and that would deal with principles, specific areas for cooperation, and the mechanisms of how NATO and Russia work together. And the SecGen is going to negotiate with Russia on behalf of the alliance. But of course, it's not only Russia NATO sees as requiring a special relationship. We also recognized that there needs to be a special relationship with Ukraine. More partnership for peace activity in Ukraine, for example. And certainly Sakhalin is planning a partnership for peace exercise in 1997 based on logistic support that hopefully will take place somewhere in Ukraine. And then finally we touched on the Mediterranean, an area which is not involved in the Partnership for Peace program at the moment, but which we recognize in NATO as being strategically very important. And there are developing relations and a developing dialogue with countries such as Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Mauritania, Morocco, and Tunisia. And at the NAC last week, it was recognized that we had to build on this Mediterranean dialogue to involve NATO with those countries to make sure that we achieved a secure Mediterranean area as well as an area to the east of Europe. Next board, please. The NAC then moved on to discuss the new command and control within NATO. And one of the issues that was taken forward a long way at Berlin earlier this year, and we came back to last week, was the whole business of a European security and defense identity, which, as you know, is ESDI for short. Essentially what we're talking about is the ability for European members of NATO to carry out operations under the political and strategic leadership of the WEU. Now that, of course, involves a lot of detail. Which bits of NATO command structure could the WEU call upon? Which staff members in NATO could work for the WEU? Which assets, NATO assets, could be allowed to be part of a WEU-led operation? And what particular missions do we envisage the WEU tackling? And all that is being worked on at the moment. With regard to the new command structure in NATO, the long-term study, there wasn't a great deal of discussion because there is broad agreement at the moment, it's subject to political agreement of course, that within the Atlantic Command area there's not going to be much change, still 3 regions perhaps, but within the Allied Command Europe, ACE, it is a much more difficult issue. There are far more countries involved and there is no agreement yet as to whether there should be 2 or 3 regions. The Combined Joint Task Force, the CJTF, was emphasized last week as being a very important aspect of the new NATO and new NATO missions. 3 headquarters have been nominated to develop the Joint Task Force Doctrine and Procedures. The Striking Fleet, based down in Norfolk, Virginia, is one of them. And in 1998, there'll be a major NATO exercise, Strong Resolve 98, which will hopefully prove the new CJTF concept. Next board, please. And finally, before I come on to mentioning the summit, resources, as I hinted at earlier, is attracting people's attention more and more. We all recognize that defense budgets are more likely to reduce than increase. We know that within Europe, there is considerable pressure on European budgets as a whole with regard to the EMU criteria, and perhaps the squeeze will come on defense budgets even more. We know in NATO that our missions and commitments will increase, and therefore we have to find a way of squaring the circle. We need an investment strategy. We need to establish priorities. We need to make optimum use of the resources that countries bring to NATO, and we need to identify the cost of our new commitments, such as enlargement. And there was a lot of discussion last week, rather more than I'd heard before, about these issues. And I know that in 1997, the Secretary General and a number of the permanent representatives will tackle the whole business of resources and investment strategy. And that's very encouraging. It's something that we in SACLAND have been urging for some time. Finally, turning to the summit, which, as you may know, is going to happen in Madrid, July 8th and 9th, 1997. The agenda is quite a demanding one. And when you think that anything agreed at the summit will have to be agreed by ministers at least a month before that, and agreed by staffs a month before that, there's not much time to agree these issues. But hopefully at the summit, heads of state will agree a new command structure. They will finalize arrangements for ESDI. They will invite one or more countries to start negotiations for joining NATO. They will further establish an enhanced PFP program based on the Atlantic Partnership Council. They will perhaps develop even more the special relationships with Russia and the Ukraine. Whether or not a charter will be ready for signing by then remains to be seen. They will further enhance the Mediterranean dialogue. They will develop more mechanisms for conflict prevention and crisis management, and they will concentrate, as ever, on efforts against proliferation. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to offer you, but I'd be delighted to answer any questions you may have or amplify any of the points I've made. Yes?
You mentioned on resources and commitment of money to future projects. Is there a thought process underway about who will pay or how new members when you enlarge, when you invite them in? Does NATO also offer them help, financial help or otherwise, in bringing them in, bringing them up to standard, etc.?
Some of you may be aware of the RAND study, which had a go at estimating the cost of enlargement. There are a number of studies, and it depends very much on the assumptions you put in. No one really knows what the total bill will be when a country joins NATO. That is to be discussed in the process of the 16+1 negotiations next year. When that is established, and it does depend very much on the assumptions, the degree to which you need to invest in that country's infrastructure, the degree to which that country perceives it needs help to make its forces interoperable with NATO, to give you two examples. I'm sure there will be a compromise, and clearly the countries joining NATO will contribute some resources, and I imagine NATO too will contribute some, but we're some way from agreeing the details.
There will be a cost to the present NATO members of enlargement.
I would envisage so, but we don't know the details yet. Personally, I'd be surprised if there wasn't. Well, can I just, that it may not be as large as we may think. It does depend very much on the assumptions you put into the equation.
It depends on what you're asking for a standard of the enlarging.
It does indeed. It does indeed. But I wouldn't like to say it's going to be a huge cost or a large cost. There will be a cost. Yes?
Yeah, what's the strategy now for moving off dead center on reorganization of the major subordinate commands and command of AF South?
The whole business of who commands AF South is above my pay grade. Let me come back to it. It is a very important issue. We all know that. I don't see a solution at the moment. I just hope that the staffs within NATO and within Paris and Washington will be able to arrive at a suitable compromise.
I'm sorry, what's the compromise?
A suitable compromise. Now, it is very much up to the presidents of both countries whether any compromise arrived at will meet their requirements. I don't think anyone has a solution at the moment.
That goes to my question. I was wondering, on a senior military staff level within NATO, is there any discussion of how to work this out? Can you guys make any recommendations on how to get this moving?
I suspect the discussion is more between national staffs rather than NATO staffs. That's really where it has to be. I mean, having got to presidential level, it's really a matter for those two nations. Yeah.
Why no nuclear weapons on the territories of new members?
Because NATO does not see it as being necessary.
Is that subject to future negotiation and change if NATO
No,
decides?
no, they made it very clear in the communique there is no plan, no intention to deploy nuclear weapons to the territories of new members.
What about other installations, non-nuclear?
Well, this will be subject to the 16+1 debate. When NATO decides whether to invite country A or B to be a new member, then we sit down with that country and we debate the detail of the infrastructure that both NATO and the country perceives as being necessary. For example, if you're to retain the ability to deploy NATO aircraft to support that country or to operate from that country, you have to make sure that the airfields where they're going to operate can support the aircraft. I mean, that's the sort of detailed discussion that we'll be getting into and which will determine the cost.
What countries or country is likely to be invited?
Speaking on behalf of the countries who are sitting round the table, I'm sure that countries such as Poland, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, the Czech Republic, the Slovak Republic, a number of countries, in fact, about a dozen, expressed a concern, a willingness, a readiness, an eagerness to join NATO. Now, that's their perception. That's their, for example, Romania said it was their top foreign policy objective. That's what they want. It'll be a matter for NATO to decide how many it chooses to invite to become new members initially, but it is made very clear that that is not the only step. It'll be a continuing process. The door will remain open for further accession in the future.
Which country is best prepared?
At the meetings last week, there was no sense of who would be in the first tranche. There was no explicit statement of who would be invited. There was a very fruitful and friendly discussion around a very full NACC table about this whole business, but not in any definitive way.
Going back to the nuclear weapons, what is the current nuclear strategy of NATO? Because according to some reports, the actual number of nuclear weapons, warhead, has been significantly decreased right now.
The policy for nuclear weapons in NATO is it is part of our armoury. Putting it simply. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Admiral Garnett. Now, before we start the regular briefing, I have two announcements to make. First of all, I just want to point out that we have today joining us 4 public affairs officials from the Polish Ministry of Defense. Their presence here is a result of one of the many initiatives established under Secretary Perry and the Department's Partnership for Peace program, and welcome to you all. The other thing that I would like to announce is that the regularly scheduled Pentagon press briefing for Thursday, December 19th, at 1:30 has been canceled. Excuse me? Forever. No, we just will not have Thursday's briefing is what I'm trying to convey. And I have, excuse me?
Why is that?
The studio, it will be in preparation for an event which will occur later that afternoon.
A housekeeping question?
Yes, and I'm anticipating, and I'm not sure that I have the answer to your housekeeping question at this point, but we're giving that some consideration too. And with that, I will try and answer your questions.
They're talking in code.
No, it's just that I've gotten to the point now that I can anticipate at least some of the questions.
Could you answer my question then?
I certainly will attempt to.
Oh, I was going to. I just thought maybe you'd know. Just get the answer.
Thank you.
Well, in that case, could you comment on this Washington Times report about the Russians allegedly spying on U.S. forces at the headquarters in Tuzla?
I certainly can. We don't believe that any such alleged eavesdropping is going on from the van that is mentioned there in that story. Let me just give you some background. As you know, Operation Joint Endeavor is a multinational operation, and the principles of openness and transparency have been at the forefront of the mission since its beginning. The intelligence information is routinely shared with commanders serving in the U.S. sector, and that's one of the reasons for the success of the operation. Each one of the nations maintains a liaison cell in the headquarters, and they have access to files, to division briefings, to updates, to exchanges of information and intelligence. In fact, the Russian liaison officer has an office 4 doors down from the commander. The other thing that I would like to point out, which is in error in that story, is the fact that there are no armed guards associated with that van. And in fact, U.S. officers have access to it. I think that all of you know that there is a requirement for communications between these liaison officers who are at the headquarters and their unit commanders. And indeed, that is the function of this van. It provides communications with between the NMD North commander and the Russian Airborne Brigade, which is operating in the sector. And it also provides the Russians a capability to communicate with their higher headquarters.
So just to be clear, you're saying that the story is just not true.
I am saying that this story is just simply not true.
But you said that you don't believe that there's spying going on from that van.
That's correct. That's what the basis of the story was.
Do you believe that there's eavesdropping taking
No,
place,
in
perhaps
fact,
not from the van?
in fact, I will go further and I'll say that we don't believe that there's any eavesdropping that is going on. It doesn't have to go on because, as I say, there's been this transparency and openness which has been at the forefront of the operation.
But are there certain methods that you have that you would know if you're being eavesdropped on?
Suzanne, I think you're aware that we would not discuss any kind of intelligence matters. Yes.
Special forces units are working with the Russians east of Tuzla. Therefore, would this sort of alleviate the need to for spying on vans and whatnot? Would this cause? I mean, the special forces and the Russians are working together right now.
Mm-hmm. But their function is not to replace the communications that their liaison officer legitimately has with the NMD North Command headquarters in Tuzla.
Do Russia and the U.S. Still engage in this sort of intelligence gathering on each other?
I'm certainly not going to answer any questions about intelligence matters. Yes, Jamie?
No, new subject too.
Go ahead, you can.
Oh, okay. Given the venting of some displeasure on the Hill in regards to the reports of the Air Force exoneration of General Schwalier, is the Secretary concerned, or has he made any statements that you know of, that there's been a sense of people being allowed to get off the hook here in very serious matters?
Secretary has made no statements regarding this report, which is still being reviewed by the Air Force.
When do you anticipate the Air Force might speak to us on the record, on the platform, on camera, on this issue, rather than doing it the way they've been doing it, which is sort of leaking it through the world?
I have no indication of a timetable of when this review will be complete.
Is there concern in this building that a commander is being let off the hook, so to speak, as some members of Congress keep saying, although the Secretary has not spoken publicly about it? Is there concern that this is a perception that's growing?
I'm not sure, John, that I can answer your question on a report that has not yet been completed. Say again what you're looking for.
Is there a concern in this building about a growing perception among some in Congress that a commander is being let off the hook after a difficult situation in Covart Towers?
Well, just being very general, first of all, I want to point out again that the report is still under review. Having said that, I should also note that it's no secret to any of you that people in this building are always sensitive to what the thinking of Congress is.
Why is it still under review? What's being reviewed?
I can't answer your question. You'll have to check with the Air Force on that. My understanding is that the report is still in their hands. Once they feel satisfied with it, that they will brief Secretary Widnall, and at that point, Dr. Perry will also be briefed on the subject.
Do you know what happens to the scheduled promotion of General Schwalier? Apparently by January, he either is promoted, as he is it's already happened, but he hasn't been officially promoted. If this report drags out even further, is he going to go ahead and be promoted before the report becomes
Well,
public?
I can't really predict what is going to happen since I don't know, one, when the report is going to be out, and secondly, when the general's promotion is due to occur. I don't believe that the next increment of promotions has yet been announced.
Well, he's on an old list, supposedly.
That is correct. My understanding is he was actually selected in 1995.
Can you take the question of how long he can stay on an old list before he must be promoted or dropped?
I think I would refer you to the Air Force for that. Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask if, so that means there's been no congressional action taken? His files are not under review by anyone? Is this just an automatic
Well, the
promotion
action
without
that,
any-
the only congressional action that's been taken with regard to the general was that his promotion was confirmed by the Senate. Yes.
On the issue of the merger announced on Sunday,
Yes.
was there any informal heads up given to, I guess, Deputy Secretary White was in town over the weekend? Did he receive any advance informal notification that
I'm
was to
not
be-
aware of any kind of advance notification that was given to anybody on this, other than the fact that there was a meeting which occurred on Monday, yesterday, involving the chief executive officers of both companies, and they came to the building to essentially restate what they had announced the day before to the news media, which is appropriate since, I might add, the department is involved in the process of determining any kind of concerns that the government might have on the merger.
As far as you know, no one in here was.
I
knew
think there
before
was,
Sunday.
excuse me?
as far as you know, no senior officials here knew before Sunday morning.
That's correct.
Can you walk us through what the process is, how the Pentagon voices its either concern or support for this merger? What is the process?
There will be a team formed headed by the Deputy Undersecretary for Industrial Affairs, excuse me, I've got that title wrong, for Industrial Affairs and Installations, John Goodman. He will be joined on that team by a representative from the General Counsel's Office and by service representatives. Now, the actual process varies from case to case, but basically the purpose of the team is to thoroughly review the potential merger of Boeing and McDonnell Douglas as to what national security and industrial competition consequences it could have. And once they have made a determination on that, they will provide it to the lead agency of the government, which will be dealing with this issue, and that varies from time to time, and it will be either the Federal Trade Commission or the Justice Department. And I don't believe it has yet been determined which one of the two it will be.
At this point, can you say if the Pentagon has any concerns about the merger?
Well, I don't believe that we have any opinion at this point, since we have not yet started the review. However, I will say that the department recognizes that consolidation of the defense industry is both inevitable and necessary as the budget the defense budget has declined. I want to point out that in the past 10 years, defense procurement spending has dropped more than 60% in real terms. And so consolidating and restructuring make good sense. As long as we continue to have competition, the economies of scale can help the taxpayers in the long run through savings. Did you have a question back there? Okay.
Hasn't the Defense Department actively been encouraging this merger, in fact, behind the scenes?
I am certainly not aware of any behind-the-scenes encouragement. I'm aware that the talk of this merger has been going on for the past, I think, 3 years, and so I don't believe anyone was particularly surprised by the announcement on Sunday, except perhaps the timing.
Just to state John's question another way, though, aren't there Pentagon policies that in fact encourage companies like this to merge? Don't they get to write off certain expenses and things if they
No, there are no. We don't cover any costs in mergers. There is a provision for the department to provide some to share some costs in connection with restructuring, but it's not clear at this point exactly what would be involved in this case. We have in the past shared some of the costs of restructuring as a result of other company actions, but we do not pay for mergers.
There's no Pentagon policy that results in any sort of financial windfall or benefit to these companies from merging?
Certainly not from merging. Yes.
What's the timetable for John Goodman to report back?
Well, the only guidance I think he is operating under is to do a very thorough job, and one which can provide insight to either, as I say, the Federal Trade Commission or the Department of Justice. I'm sure that the companies involved would like to have it done as quickly as possible, and we would like to be as accommodating as we possibly can, but there's certainly no timetable that's outlined in this.
That report goes to the Deputy Secretary?
It goes from the under, and no doubt it will go through his boss, who is Dr. Kaminsky, to the Deputy Secretary. But ultimately, it is communicated to one of those two agencies, whichever has the lead.
When will they actually actively start the process? Will they wait till after the holiday?
I think that their intention, based on what we were told in this meeting yesterday, was to proceed as quickly as possible. But their lawyers have some work to do before they can actually do the appropriate paperwork on the subject. Yes.
New subject?
Yeah, have we, oh, yeah.
Is this correct to say that the Defense Department has to approve this? We've been using polite words.
I
about
think
showing
that, I
concern.
think that we provide our input to the Federal Trade Commission or the Justice Department, but I think that the word approval is probably too strong. But we do play a very active role in this, as we have in recent years. Yes, Dana?
Did Congress change the amount or the formula for the amount of money you can actually rebate to companies as a result of restructuring?
I am not aware of any congressional action that has taken place in this, but the restructuring process is one that involves the contractors submitting an overall plan. It involves our auditors going out to the companies and actually going through with a fine-tooth comb exactly what they propose, evaluating it, and then we make a determination based on this audit as to what share of this we believe that that we should accept.
Do you know if any of these companies, either of them did that before this, as a part of their
You mean in the
preparation?
past?
Well, no, maybe they've already estimated what their potential, whatever you call it.
I have
rebate
no
from the
indication
Pentagon is.
that they've done that, because again, they didn't have any idea, and as far as I know, at least they didn't communicate yesterday's meeting any sense of restructuring, and certainly not of any costs associated with that. Yes.
If mergers and acquisitions are so well received here, why specifically has Kaminsky asked for a review of the Pentagon's merger and acquisition policy, I think from the Defense Science Board or the Defense Resources Board? What's the purpose of that review now?
I'll have to take that question because I'm not sure that indeed he has. But let me take it and see if we can get an answer for you on that. You got any more on this one? Yes. You got.
Does Goodman's panel include people from outside the building, like Defense Science Board people or?
I am not aware that it includes anybody outside of the building, but let me take that question just in case there's a change in that. Yeah.
Any examples of companies that did go through restructuring that received assistance from the Pentagon in doing
The
so?
only one that I have up-to-date information on is Lockheed Martin, and there is savings there of $2.375 billion. Our share of the costs involved in the restructuring was $348 million.
And the savings, how do you...
$2.375 billion.
But can you define savings from, when you say savings, what do you mean in this case?
It's savings based on certified projections of future cost savings, and I believe that there is a piece of paper that we put out some time ago on this that actually comes up with some details that we can provide you. Okay, other subjects. Yes, Bill.
Thanks. The report of General Shalakashvili proposing, or at least talking about, a separate kind of force to apprehend war criminals in Bosnia. And my question is, what can you tell us about that? And is this a program or proposal that's about to bear fruit in the administration, national security apparatus? Or what can you say about it, Mike?
Well, basically what I can tell you is that I think the United States and other countries are not satisfied with the progress that is being made in bringing war criminals to justice. And there have been some recent international conferences on that subject. NATO authorities, since the outset, have been looking at options to strengthen the ICTY and to put pressure on these indicted war criminals. There have been discussions on new and effective means of implementing procedures that would accomplish this, but as yet no decisions have been made on how they will proceed.
I see. So this is not really a contingency plan or
This is
something.
not a plan that has gone to the point that anybody can actually talk about it.
There are no forces being assembled.
No force is being assembled. Yeah.
The Canacea modeling is
Oh, yeah.
supposed to have been delivered to the Pentagon,
That's correct.
and do you have any update on that?
The only update that I have is that we anticipate receiving a briefing on the subject of the work that has been done on this, on the modeling, sometime this week. If there's anything that comes out of that, I will be back to you.
Okay. And is it in the building? Is it still being analyzed?
My understanding is there may be some paper in the building, but nobody in the building has been briefed on it yet. And we anticipate that there will be a briefing later this week that will go over the results of what they have been doing. But I just want to hasten to add that what we're talking about here is the study that has been done by the Institute of Defense Analysis, IDA is what they are called, and it does not actually apply numbers to the models, it just looks at the models themselves.
So in other words, it defines a geographical area? That doesn't
I do not know that, and that's why I say I think we've got to be briefed on this before we can really tell you much about it. Yeah.
Will they include a simulation? IDA does simulation. Would they include a simulation?
I can't tell you. My sense is that there is information that we are going to have to apply to the models after we actually receive the report and receive the models that will enable us to come to some decision. But we're not to that point yet. Yes.
Can you
Sure.
tell us anything about what kind of military equipment is included in the aid package for Lebanon?
Well, first of all, I think there may be there was a conference which took place which discussed this matter, which had to do with non-military sorts of aid. What I can tell you is that that some time ago we agreed to sell Lebanon some utility helicopters, which are, and I think it's 16 UH-1s. They have not yet been delivered. This was announced, I don't know how long ago, but some time ago. This is not associated with that recent conference that took place.
So there's no military equipment in the new package?
Not that I am aware of. Yes, Jamie.
There's a report in the Washington Times quoting a Defense Intelligence Agency official as telling a congressional staff that it's his opinion a shoulder-fired missile shot down TWA Flight 800. Do you know if there's any evidence to support that?
I know of no evidence. Let me just restate what you said, and that was that, first of all, this was a personal opinion. Secondly, the individual in question was speaking in hypothetical terms. He indicated that this was a possibility, which I think you will find is basically the approach that has been followed as this investigation is proceeded. And the third thing that I wanted to point out is that he indicated he had absolutely no evidence on this score.
I just wanted to ask on that Shelley Casvili proposal, who all backed that? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure he didn't just speak off the cuff. Did the White House back it? Was it a Pentagon proposal, or what? Who was he speaking for?
I can't tell you. I know that the subject, though, has been discussed, as I indicated, in recent weeks and months in this building and elsewhere. But as I said before, there have been no decisions made.
So this is something that Shelley just sort of dreamed up and floated out there?
No, I don't think it's anything that he dreamed up. I don't think that he said anything that is different from what other people have said in the past. If you look at what he said was that he thought that this mission required a certain kind of a force, that was trained in a certain way, and I think everybody would agree with that.
We should send in an I-4 of some kind.
Did Secretary Perry talk to him about it? Did they talk together and they agreed that?
I can't tell you. I can't help you on that one.
Will there be any review of the policy regarding transporting nuclear weapons, given that this truck apparently slid off the road in Nebraska with 2 nuclear warheads on icy roads?
I am aware of no plan to change any rules regarding the transport of weapons, special weapons.
Apparently.
Yes.
Yes, there was another item today was rather disturbing. Can you confirm the reports that some elements of the Russian I-4 contingent in Bosnia are spying
Bill,
on
we
the...
went through that.
You went through that
we've been
already?
down this road once.
Oh,
I'd be
wow.
glad to go through it again, but let me not bore everybody else with it. Thank you.
What about this paraphrasing U.S. troops?
I can confirm that one.